Hello and welcome to Elevate 2020 session on PowerClient, the new automated application deployment feature in PowerBuilder 2019 revision number 3. Hi, I'm Chris Pollock. I'm currently the Director of Developer Relations here at Appeon. I joined in 2016, just 1 month after Appeon acquired PowerBuilder and InfoMaker from SAP. In 1991, I started my own consulting company, Software Tool and Die, and I consulted on many Canadian and even US government mega projects on PowerBuilder, InfoMaker, and PowerServer. Mega projects, these would be databases in the terabytes or petabytes, and concurrent application users in the 8 to 10,000 and above range. In 1989, I started with PowerBuilder Alpha 0.8. I also worked prior to that at Colonnade Database Systems with Mr. Dave Litwack, who's the original designer of PowerBuilder, and Mr. Kim Sheffield, who's the original designer and author of the data window object itself. You can reach me here in Appeon, or you can use this LinkedIn URL that you see here on the screen. Let's have a look at the session agenda. We're going to have a look at the automated deployment benefits and key features. Traditional deployment versus the new PowerClient deployment. PowerClient versus the new PowerServer 2021 coming out next year. The PowerClient server installation considerations, PowerClient compiling considerations, PowerClient project setup considerations, Workstation installation features and considerations, and of course, various demos along the way as we talk about each major feature area. So first of all, let's have a look at the benefits of automated deployment. This can solve many of the headaches and costs associated with deploying and updating client-server applications. I have a little bullet point coming up later on about the cost. Purchasing and creating your own installation programs is no longer required, and no longer necessary to manually install and update PowerBuilder applications to each Windows machine, and no longer necessary to manually install and update PowerBuilder runtime DLLs to each Windows machine. And easy to use. Basically, configure your web server, configure a PowerClient project, and then deploy. And here's the nice part about the asterisk from above. PowerClient is included free with PowerBuilder 2019 revision 3 and above in both the Professional and Cloud Pro editions. And when I say free, that's free to use in various environments, not just development. We'll talk about that shortly. So what are the key features of automated deployment? Automated on-premise application deployment solution. It incrementally updates application and PowerBuilder runtime components, and there's a little note here because you can choose the update options. Deploy and do not update, or update all the time as soon as you start the application, or somewhere in between. But we'll talk about that as we go along. Packages all the necessary files, the PowerBuilder virtual machine, which we now refer to as the core, PowerBuilder resource files, third-party OCX files, and DLLs. It supports 100% of the PowerBuilder features in both 32 and 64-bit. And the note here is that it supports P-code compilation only. Machine code compiles are not eligible for deployment. The ID can FTP to the server, and we're talking about the PowerClient server here, or can create a standalone install package, which you can then hand off to your operations personnel. It supports Windows-based devices only, such as desktops, laptops, Surface tablets, as long as it has the Intel processors in it, and of course, a version of Microsoft Windows installed, or virtual machines. It requires no code changes to the PowerBuilder applications. And you're able to install and use in various environments, for example, quality assurance, integration test, systems testing, all the way to production. So note again, we have online and offline update options for the application and runtime. And we support both 32 and 64-bit P-code compilation. So let's have a look at current application deployment. Most likely your PowerBuilder developer has built an application. They need to compile it, and then they need to create a setup. And there's both human and physical costs associated with this process. You may have to buy some specialized software, for example. Then we have to figure out how to basically package and distribute that to various workstations within your local area network. And then you have to manually install each workstation, or if you're lucky enough, You may actually buy some kind of systems management software that does this in the background. But again, you have to go and configure systems management software as well to be able to do that. So we have to repeat this many times across the various workstations within your local area network. PowerClient application deployment. The PowerBuilder developer creates the application. It gets compiled. However, the next thing is you just deploy it to the PowerClient server using HTTP or HTTPS protocol, your choice. And again, from the web server, HTTP or HTTPS can be used to deploy it to the workstation. Again, both the application and the runtime. And later on in this presentation, we're going to see exactly how that works from the workstation perspective. PowerClient versus PowerServer 2021. PowerClient coming out was a client-server architecture, and it supports applications of that same nature. Data access executes on the client side, and client interfaces directly with the database. You can use HTTP or HTTPS server deployment, and note no application conversion work. So it's basically configure, click, and go. PowerServer 2021. Compared to the existing PowerServers, this is a complete technical re-architecture internally of the PowerServer product. Notice now that it's going to be a cloud-native architecture. Data access will execute from the server side, which is akin to the existing PowerServers. However, the client, which is the PowerBuilder application, will make REST API calls to PowerServer. PowerServer itself is based on the .NET Core runtime. And it typically will take some days of conversion work. For example, your PowerBuilder application is going to be converted to make REST API calls. Your data access is going to be configured on the PowerServer side. So there's some work to do to refactor this to make it truly cloud native. But we'll talk about that in early 2021 when PowerServer comes out in beta. PowerClient server pre-installation. Basically, we have to install and configure a basic web server. We need remote deployment that can be done via FTP or standalone package. So in this case, we're going to have a look at what do you do to configure FTP options on your web server for this to happen. The standalone package will be akin to the PowerBuilder packager, which creates an MSI. FTP requirements. We'll need a username and password for accessing the FTP server, and that particular user profile needs to have read-write permission to the FTP side directory of the web server. The FTP home directory should be mapped to the root of the web server. So let's have a look at the web server installation. For this particular demo, I'm going to use the Microsoft Windows IIS web server on Windows 10. I'm using build 2004 of Windows 10. So in Windows 10, the first thing you need to do is install the web server. In order to do that, it's a little bit different than the older versions of Windows. You need to go to the Control Panel, Applications. Then you would go to Optional Features. From Optional Features, we're going to go to More Windows Features, just to make it a little harder. And eventually we get to a dialog box that may look like something that you saw in an earlier version of Windows. Notice the key here is Internet Information Services, or IIS, needs to be activated. You definitely want to activate FTP server, and you want to actually install that as an FTP service. Creating FTP extensibility options is optional. Within the web management tools, just the IIS web management service and the console is required. That compatibility scripts and tools are optional. And for World Wide Web services, you'll need HTTP features and security for HTTPS. And then optionally, you can have development features, health and diagnostics, and performance features. Those are all optional. And optional is the Internet Services Hostable Web Core. And make sure that the .NET framework is installed as well for IIS, but not necessarily for PowerClient. So to test to make sure that IIS is available, type in //localhost. And you should now get the Internet IIS prompt. If you see this window appear after you type in //localhost, your IIS web server is now ready to accept the PowerClient installation. So let's have a look at the PowerClient server installation component. You need to log into the Appeon website, proceed to the User Center, select Downloads, select the overall Appeon installer for PowerBuilder 2019 Revision 3, and then run the main Appeon installer. Select the PowerClient App Publisher feature. Notice you can do an online install or you can download the installation package. And then verify the PowerClient installation. Note for the download option, that's the offline install. That's my favorite. Download the installation package once and then put it on a file server so that other PowerBuilder application developers or operations personnel can run the installation on their various environments as required. So let's have a look at the PowerClient server install. One of the first things we need to do is log into the Appeon website. And then from the main menu, we need to go to either User Center, or notice in the newer website we have a direct link to the download section. In the 2019 section, you're going to see a download for the PowerBuilder installer 2019 Revision 3. At this point in time, we're not quite in production or general availability. So you're going to actually pick up the revision number 3 download from the beta version tab. And then we're going to select installer for revision number 3. And it's going to download that. Here you can see the actual overall application installer. We're going to use the right-hand mouse button and select Run as Administrator. We're going to acknowledge the license agreement. And then we can actually look at the installer itself. So notice here on the left-hand side, we have the new PowerClient App Publisher. We're going to check that. And then the bottom right-hand side, I'm going to select Download, so I can actually download it to my local PC. This will be an example of the offline install. Here at the bottom, we can see that we've downloaded the PowerClient App Publisher. The installation is PowerClient App Publisher.exe. And again, we're going to right-hand mouse button and run as administrator. We'll select Next, accept the license agreement, and make sure that you install it to the root of that web server. Because we're running IIS, the root location is going to be c-inetpub www-root. So after the PowerClient server is installed, we have to look at the interface between the PowerBuilder IDE and the PowerClient server. Part of this is a new compilation sequence. Although the web server is used really as a file server, basically the app and runtime repository, there is a compilation with PowerClient that is a little different than the traditional P-code approach. All PBD files, for example, are broken down granularly into individual object definition files and may be delivered encrypted. Note that this is a new feature for this type of project. Native client-server projects did not have the encrypted option. The new compilation approach enhances PowerBuilder files so that the PowerClient can reliably and incrementally update these for the client-server applications, including the runtime. Source files, such as source for a window, data window, user object as this example, have corresponding P-code files that have new file extensions. For example, DWO for data window object, which is equivalent to an SRD. And same thing for a user object and for a function and window. PowerClient compilation requires that each version of every P-code file has a unique identifier with a hash value. The hash value, of course, so we're confident on the transmission of the file and a unique identifier to know exactly what it is. The hash value also serves as an update indicator. When a user runs the client-server PowerBuilder application, the P-code related files can incrementally be downloaded and updated. The PowerClient will initially be installed by accessing the PowerBuilder app via a URL that you post in the web browser on the associated workstation. We're going to see the details of that when I do the PowerClient Workstation demo later in this presentation. The PowerBuilder app has no dependency on the web browser, so it doesn't matter what the type, version, or settings are. You just put in the URL and it'll actually invoke the PowerClient feature to download and install and then maintain the application over a local area network. So PowerClient project configuration steps. There's basically 7 steps prior to deployment. Define your overall app's options in the General tab. This is very similar to a previous project that you would use in earlier versions of PowerBuilder. Confirm your list of PowerBuilder libraries that are used. PowerBuilder resource files map to those libraries in the Libraries tab. Again, very similar to older project. Configure app executable digital signature that needs signing in the Signing tab. Well, this is new. We couldn't do that in traditional projects for client-server. Configure the web server connection in the Deployment tab. Notice that you can also define an update strategy and shortcuts to be configured on the workstation. We'll see that when we actually do the actual demo from the PowerBuilder IDE. Define the overall app's file deployment in the External Files tab. So external files will be like third-party OCXs or DLLs, for example. And then define the PowerBuilder runtime file requirements in the Runtime tab. Note that PowerClient Server will automatically handle the DLLs. For example, in the PowerBuilder packager, it never accounted for ATL100, MSVCP, or MSVCR100 files. You had to package them separately. This will be done automatically now in the PowerClient Server or to the actual workstation. And then you can define special preload requirements in the Start Options tab. So the example here again, registering an OCX or putting a DLL into the Windows General Assembly cache. And of course, you can also use an MSI option as well. And there's a relationship back to the Deployment tab. You don't have to deploy directly to the server. You can create an MSI and then run that separately for yourself or your operations personnel within your IT environment. So let's have a look at a PowerClient project demo. I've now switched to a second machine where I have a more robust PowerClient server installed, as well as the PowerBuilder 2019 revision number 3 IDE. Let's have a look at the IDE in detail. So you notice on the left-hand side for the workspace and target, I've picked up the Easy Order application that's used in the PowerBuilder Fundamentals course. And I've migrated it over here to PowerBuilder 2019 R3 build 2593. Again, we can choose the build now separately because the runtime is separated or decoupled from the IDE. Under Systems Options, you can see here I have different particular runtimes that I can choose. For the details of how to do this and how to configure PowerBuilder and PowerServer for multiple decoupled runtimes, please have a look at the Elevate 2020 presentation on decoupling the PowerBuilder IDE and runtime. Notice in the PowerBuilder 2019 Revision 3 IDE, when I go and create a project, I have a new one, PowerClient Client Server Application. So I can choose that and then fill in the blank. To save time, I've already built one. Project here is PowerClient EXE. So if I open that one, we'll see here that there are different tabs: General, Libraries, External Files, Runtime, Signing, Deployment, and Start Options. So we just need to fill in the items in each of those particular tab pages, and then we're ready to deploy. So for the General tab, this is very similar to a native client-server project that you've used before in other versions of PowerBuilder. To make some room here, I'm just going to hide the output area. Now you can see the fact that we can specify increment or full build. We can define the platform, 32 or 64-bit. We have a new option here, however, whether or not to encrypt the PowerBuilder files. Then embed a manifest or not. These options are exactly the same as a native client-server project. Execution level, allow access to the user interface. And then just fill in the properties for the executable, which is exactly the same, again, as a previous project object. Let's have a look at the libraries. So libraries are basically the same. We can specify the libraries by using the right-hand mouse button here, going to Properties of the target, and we can add or subtract libraries. When we do that, they'll show up here in the library list. And if you want, you can attach a PowerBuilder resource file to any one of these libraries. In the External Files tab, this is where we do the packaging. Notice here I've already created a package, so create package. Underneath that, I've specified it's the order entry application with the suffix PC, so I know that this one is coming from PowerClient. Of course, you don't need to put the suffix there. I just did it for demo purposes. What I also did is I copied the theme folder from PowerBuilder installation, a subfolder of this particular application, so that now I can actually run themes. So if we go to the application object and we have a look at additional properties, themes, you can see here that I'm specifying that there should be a subfolder that needs to be also deployed to the workstation. I'm interested in the theme Flat Design Dark. So I'll hit OK here. Now if I just execute the application the way it is, you can see here that the dark theme comes up. So as far as the native execution is concerned, this is all I need to make sure of before I actually do the packaging over to the PowerClient server. I've also specified the icons. Of course, those could have been put into a PowerBuilder dynamic library using a PowerBuilder resource file. For the PowerBuilder Fundamentals course, we didn't do that. I'm just going to specify the image objects directly here. Notice that I've also included the INI file here in this listing as well. For files downloaded at startup, we can add files to this particular area as well. Redistributable files, ATL, MSVCR, MSVCP 100.dll. But now PowerClient is going to take care of that for me, so I don't really need to add anything here. For the resource files, I've added the icon, which will be registered on the desktop if you choose that optional installation configuration. For the runtime here, there are packages. What you need to do, first of all, is make sure that the runtime is the runtime that you want, because now you have a decoupled runtime, so make sure you have the one that you need to deploy out to the workstation defined here. Remember, again, that's going to be available if you want to change that in the Tools System Options dialog. Notice now these are the packages that you can actually put out there, that as far as the PowerBuilder runtime. You just check whatever you want. You can uncheck all of them if you want, and then just go to the specific ones that you need if you want a tailored PowerBuilder runtime with a smaller footprint. Then we have a new capability here of signing the application executable. So notice here we can actually use a signing tool for using the Windows SDK, and then you can specify the signing tool's location, a certificate that you've actually had built for you, and a password, and the type of algorithm you want for the signature. And you have some choices here. And the URL of where you're actually going to find the server that'll verify the certificate. So filling in these options will actually sign the executable. I'm just going to leave it here as do not sign. For the deployment side, you have a choice. You can deploy to the local PowerClient server. So you notice here under server configuration, it really just points to the IIS web root. And we can test that and everything's okay. The other option we have is to go to remote server. So then when you go to the same command button, server configuration, you're going to have the ability here to add a server profile. I've already done that. And if you have a look here, you can see that I'm pointing back to the machine where I actually did the actual install of IIS and the demo of PowerClient server installation on my machine called STD Chris. This machine is different. This is STD Chris LT for laptop. So I can point back to another development machine, or this could be a machine that's used in the QA cycle or integration test if I have remote access to it. I can specify the username, password, and the FTP port address, and then test the connection. And then if everything's okay, I can add that to the list and specify that when I deploy this particular application, it's going to go directly to this particular server with this logical name. However, I'm running PowerClient under this machine's IIS server, so it's local. So I'll just leave that as local. Again, I can change the deployment version. I can specify when the application will actually be picked up. So if I have a new one, for example, I can say, don't pick this up until December 1st or January 1st of 2021, whatever I like. And when does it expire? So this is new, that we can specify a start and an end for this application. In other words, don't run this thing after, in this case, November 2030. That's a long-running application from 2020. And now you can specify the update strategy. This is new and really exciting.
Always update. That means every time the application starts from the workstation, it'll check the Power Server and make sure that if there are any updates, that the application is automatically updated locally, and then it will execute. You can specify update when connected. This is a nice option when you don't have a stable network. And this option says basically the application will run the way it was when it was last deployed, when we did have a connection. If we do have a connection, it'll try and look for updates. If there is no connection, the application continues as before. And of course, never update that. And then this would only occur when we want to actually manually push it out at this point. So we can specify when that's going to happen on a manual basis. For this demo, I'm just going to leave the default, always update. And then you can see here the download mode, download files as necessary, or download files when the app first starts up. Your choice. So in the start option, you notice here, this is where we can specify whether or not a shortcut will be installed on the desktop and show some kind of loading animation before the application runs. Also, we can specify here whether we want the PBD files checked to make sure they're valid. So if you really want them to be secure, intact after transmission to the workstation, you can check this option. And then in the preload run event options, for example, here I can paste in the fact I want to change directory to the .NET framework, and then I want to run the regassembly utility from the Windows operating system, and I want to register the DLL and put it in the general assembly cache. Going a little further down, you notice here that we can also specify whether the application is going to be run as administrator privileges, where the PowerClient launcher on the workstation wants to actually run the application exe under that configuration. And now we can save those options, use the right-hand mouse button on the project, and deploy that to the PowerClient server. So notice here that the PowerClient deploy will automatically do a complete rebuild to make sure everything is the same. It'll also check to see whether it has to do a full or incremental build. This makes sure that all the application files get published in their latest compilation and verification. PowerBuilder runtime choices that you chose also get marked in the PowerClient server. Notice at the bottom here in the output area, the PowerClient app has been published to the PowerClient server, and we finished the deployment. And that's all there is from the server side of life. So in the next phase, let's have a look at the workstation installation. This is where we're going to run the PowerClient application. For the first time, it's going to download and install the application and the necessary PowerBuilder runtime modules. If this is the second time we've run the application, it's just going to go into update mode, or whatever you specify for the update characteristic, and then execute the updates to the application and or PowerBuilder runtime as required. It's very easy to do. It's just going to be the HTTP or HTTPS/hostname of the web server, and then /appname as you deployed it from the PowerBuilder IDE. In my example, it was orderentry_PC for PowerClient. And you're just going to put that in the business applications machine's web browser of their choice. There'll be no application startup icon installed on the desktop if you specified that in the PowerClient project. However, in the project, remember, you can actually specify whether a desktop icon and or shortcut would be created. If that was checked, that will be done during the actual installation. Users need to start the apps in the web browser if there is no shortcut. Note that this does not require administrator rights to install. And users will be prompted to install the PowerClient launcher, which the application is called pbappshell.exe, from the PowerClient server. They should accept that and continue. This will only be done once. The PowerBuilder IDE project will also specify how INIs can be used by the application. Of course, by default, it probably has to be there. However, you can specify now in the PowerClient project from the PowerBuilder IDE whether INI files require user customization or not. In other words, they're either fixed, read-only, or they can be modified as required. So let's look at a PowerClient workstation demo. I'm going to switch to a third machine, which is actually a business user workstation, so you can actually see what a real workstation would behave like. You can see this workstation is Janet, and it's a basic laptop configuration running Windows 10, again, 2004 version, latest build. If I go to the control panel to application and features and search for anything in relation to PowerBuilder or PowerClient, you can see there's nothing installed. Going to your favorite web browser, you can use any of the latest web browsers. So typing in the URL to the application, which again, Chris LT, my laptop, is the PowerClient server, and then my application was deployed as order entry underscore PC. Notice you get a prompt at this point to download the application because the application doesn't exist on the workstation, and so I'm going to select the download button. You notice on the bottom left-hand side here, the Microsoft Edge browser is allowing me now to open PowerClient application shell. I'm going to accept the license agreement and select install. So now the shell has been set up. So what happens when I enter the application again? So the client application shell, that only has to be done once. From then on, every time you start an application, you'll see this kind of a in progress indicator. So you can see at this point in time, it's downloading and installing the runtime library files. In other words, the PowerBuilder virtual machine, or what we call now the PowerBuilder core, plus any optional modules that you needed, as you checked off in the PowerClient project within your PowerBuilder Revision 3 ID. The second phase will be to actually install the core files and then move on to the application itself and download the real order entry PBDs and executable, plus any other external resources that you were requiring. Notice this is a two-step procedure in this particular application's case. Notice we now get an application, and the application now starts as it would on the actual PowerBuilder Revision 3 IDE. We selected, remember, the black theme in our previous demo, so that dark theme is carried forward here to the workstation through PowerClient server. We'll enter a secret password, and that should end up opening the main screen. Here we can actually search for contact information, just like we would on the native Client Builder application. Double-clicking any of the clients, we can have a look at their order history. So it's working exactly the same as we saw before. I'll exit the application. I asked for some shortcuts to be installed. So notice here, if we go to the actual start menu down here, we actually have a shortcut for this. Let's have a look here at this particular shortcut. And let's look at the properties. You can see here basically it's the shortcut, which is just communicating back to a PowerClient server, which in this case is Chris LT, my laptop, and then investigating the order entry underscore PC application. So let's launch the application from the shortcut. Again, that's just executing that HTTP URL request. It checks to see if there are any changes from the PowerClient server, and then starts the application if there isn't. If there are changes, it would apply them. So you can see now that the application is actually executing exactly like it did before. So let's do something a little different. Let me go back to the actual PowerClient server machine, and I'm going to change the theme, and then we'll see what happens when I restart here. So now that I've made change to the theme, I've actually changed it to light blue and republished it on the server. Let's go back to the start menu and select that shortcut again. Remember, again, the shortcut just runs that URL link that you could also post in your browser to run the application. Notice that there has been some changes. So the application core files are being updated. Of course, that's because of the theme. See, now the application is starting. It behaves the same as far as logging on, but you can see, of course, the command buttons are blue. And you can see when the main window comes up that the toolbar is different. We actually have a blue theme here. And then the search screen and the detail screen, of course, are different. Most of the highlighting is in blue. And we definitely have a blue theme going on here. The search button was blue, for example. And the row indicator is blue. So the theme definitely changed. And all I had to do is restart the application, and I got the new version automatically from the PowerClient server. Let's look a bit under the hood. So going back here to the application features in the control panel, applications installed, refreshing the search for power, we can see here that the PowerClient application shell has been installed. If I go here to File Explorer, notice if I go to the user's workstation, Janet, application data, roaming. Under the local user settings, we now have a new thing called PB apps. Underneath that, we have applications and what gets downloaded from PowerClient server. Under applications, we have the runtime, which is 19.2.0 build 2593. And if we double click down there, you can actually see the zip files that were downloaded, and they get decompressed into the DLLs. So that's how the runtime is handled. If we go back to the order entry application itself, you notice here that each PBD is handled in a separate folder. That's a little different than a native application deployment. But then you can see here that if you drill down into that, you can see here the separate objects that which would normally be found in a PBD. So this is how the workstation handles it. It's a separate folder, and all the objects are basically exported into their new formats. And you can see the different extensions. DWO, source for a data window, the application object itself, a menu.men. And then if you look in the main folder, you can see the order entry PC executable, requested that the INI file be downloaded as well as the complementary images that the application requires. That all came down in a zip file originally. So if I double click that, you can see here now, here's the theme folder, and here are all the files that I required for my application that came down. They got automatically unzipped and ready to go. And that's what gets executed at start of time when you run that link, or you put in that URL in the browser. It checks to see if that executable that I have locally is different than what's on the PowerClient server. Any changes are automatically downloaded and applied, and then the application just starts.
So let's look at a high-level summary of the PowerClient feature that we just talked about. It's an automated on-premise application deployment solution. It's included for free and free to use in other environments in the PowerBuilder Professional or Cloud Pro editions. It incrementally installs and then updates both the application and PowerBuilder runtime components. It packages all necessary files for the PowerBuilder application deployment. It facilitates 100% support of the native PowerBuilder features. And it requires no code changes within your existing PowerBuilder applications. And you're able to install, and it's free to use in various environments. Again, the example would be development, quality assurance, integration test, user acceptance, all the way to production. And it's very easy to use for the PowerBuilder developer. Basically, define a PowerClient project and then deploy. So for more information on PowerClient, you can always ask questions at the community.appeon.com, where there are various discussions on various articles and videos and training material. You can also find Appeon on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and of course YouTube, which is also great because a lot of educational videos are posted on the YouTube channel. So I hope you've enjoyed the PowerClient presentation. Also, don't forget to review the Decoupling PowerBuilder IDE and Runtime presentation for more details on how the decouple runtime works, not only for native PowerBuilder applications, but also for PowerClient, if you want more low-level technical details. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation, my tips and considerations, and you'll get using PowerBuilder 2019 Revision 3 real soon. I hope you enjoy the rest of the Elevate 2020 conference. Thanks for watching.